Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2026 Annual Conference and Book Fair in Baltimore. I'm Michelle Morano, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. I've been on the board for 3 years now, and in that time, I've been constantly blown away by the dedication and hard work and thoughtfulness of the shockingly small staff that puts this conference on every year and that supports the writing community in so many other ways throughout the year. So it's an honor and a privilege to work with them and with a fantastic group of volunteer board members. The AWP is a small but mighty nonprofit. I'm a nonfiction writer, so I put it into everything. Nonprofit organization that amplifies the voices of writers and the academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. Although I'm a member of AWP's board of directors, I am first and foremost a member of AWP. I joined in 2002 when I attended my first conference in New Orleans and was blown away by the panels and readings and conversations that made me feel truly that I'd found my people. So if you're not yet a member, we do invite you to become one today. We're delighted to bring you today's event. I'd like to acknowledge and thank Kundiman for this panel and their support of the conference. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. I have just a few reminders before the event. Please respect the seats marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. Please give the authors about 10 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing table, which will be just outside to the left, before you approach them to have your book signed. And please remember to silence your phones. Thank you. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Gina Chung, who will introduce this fantastic event.
Hello and welcome all. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, great. We're very excited to welcome you all today to this reading and conversation with Lina Abu Talib, Sarah Aziza, and Fargo Nissim Tbakhi. We are so thrilled that you can all be here with us today, whether it's in person here in Baltimore or virtually. My name is Gina Chung, and I'm the programs director at Kundiman. We're very grateful to the 2026 AWP conference for having us today for this very special reading and conversation. And if this is your first time joining Kundiman for an event, welcome. A little bit about us. Kundiman is a literary nonprofit dedicated to nurturing writers and readers of Asian American literature. Kundiman creates a space where Asian Americans can explore, through art, the unique challenges that face the new and ever-changing diaspora. We see the arts as a tool of empowerment, of education and liberation, and of addressing proactively the legacy that we will leave for our future. Through readings, online classes, and our retreat, we seek to uplift writers of color and the storytellers of our communities. Later today, from 3:20 p.m. to 4:35 p.m., we will be co-hosting the AAPI caucus in room 307, level 300, here in the convention center. Later tonight, starting at 6:30, we will be at an off-site dance party that we are also co-hosting, the theme of which is Hard Times Require Furious Dancing. You can learn more about both of these events through our website, kundiman.org, or our Instagram, Kundiman Forever. We hope to see you there. As mentioned, we have books for sale here today from our panelists, so please make sure to stick around and check them out after this event. Before we begin, we want to share a brief statement that has been adapted from language that was shared previously by the Radius of Arab American Writers, Rawi, and Mizna. We would like to extend our grief and solidarity, especially as our Swana communities are once again under bombardment. We are in solidarity with the victims of the genocides in Palestine and Sudan, and with all Indigenous peoples, including those on whose ancestral homelands this conference is being held, the Piscataway and Susquehannock tribes. We affirm that anti-Blackness, police, anti-immigrant violence, and all white supremacist violence must be named and opposed. These, along with the transphobic violence being legislated in the U.S., endanger the lives of trans, queer, gender-expansive, gender non-conforming, and non-binary people. None of us are free until we are all free, and all anti-racist, liberationist, and decolonial struggles are intertwined. We are grateful to all of the courageous groups committed to creating space for solace and connection, and we encourage you to support organizations such as MISNA, Indigenous Nations Poets, Undocu Poets, Kimbilio Fiction, and Reorienting Reads. And now I will introduce our readers and moderator. Lina Abu Taleb is an Egyptian and Palestinian writer who asks you to commit to the Palestinian liberation struggle. She is the author of Thalassa from Game Over Books 2026. Her pamphlet, Expeditions of Projection, was released in 2023 from Vibe. Her film, Oracle, co-produced with Youssef and Nahas, debuted in Venice 2025. She is a Brooklyn Poets Fellow, a Kundiman Fellow, and Tin House Scholar, and you can read her work at linaabutaleb.onl. Sara Aziza is a Palestinian-American writer, translator, and artist with roots in Ibdis and Der Abala, Gaza. She is the author of The Hollow Half, winner of the Palestine Book Award. Her work has also appeared in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, Best American Essays, The Baffler, Harper's, and The Nation, among others. The recipient of fellowships and support from Fulbright, McDowell, United States Artists, the Asian American Writers Workshop, and Tin House, Sara now resides on occupied Munsi, Lenape, and Canarsie land. Fargo Nissim Tbakhi is a Palestinian performance artist and the author of Terror Counter, out from Deep Vellum from 2025, and Antigone Velocity Salt, out from Deep Vellum 2027. We'll begin with readings from Sara and Fargo, and then we'll go into a conversation with our readers moderated by Lina. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Kundiman. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to my co-panelists, who I also am lucky enough to call siblings and friends. Yeah, I mean, we had a little bit of grounding just now, and I'll just reiterate that we're convening in the midst of multiple genocides, an active and expanding war of aggression in the Swana region, among other places. And I would just like to, just name the absurdity verging on egregiousness of doing something like sitting in an air-conditioned room when we're facing conditions that really should incite revolution. But my fellow panelists and I agreed yesterday to take for granted the exercise of absurdity and to grapple in good faith with what it might mean to write even amidst, and how we might push our writing as one of many fronts toward liberation. So I want to invoke, as I open a small reading from my book, The Hollow Half, the Palestinian writer and thinker Adam Haj Yahya, who wrote in a recent essay, here it is. I want to get it right. That we must not think of Palestinian return as something that will take place in the future. Rather, we practice return again and again. I'm sorry, I couldn't find the page, so I just paraphrased it. But basically, that Palestinian return is something that we must commit to as a praxis, as well as an idea, as well as a temporal future. So in the spirit of that, and my friend Fargo, who wrote that the poem is a place for rehearsing the future, I'm going to read from the chapter of my book called Dhikr, which means remember or invoke in Arabic. And instead of reading something that's more polemic, I'm going to read something that's more narrative, because I think that considering how words can move our imaginations and therefore our bodies, and therefore our sense of power and agency, I just want to give a small example of how I try to do that in a text as a reflection of how it happens outside the text. So this is from Dhikr. In the Arabic language, memory is no quiet thing. From the root the kara, the word to remember is inextricable from the acts of thought and speech. Its shapes overlap with a host of meanings that echo and compound. Strokes of significance thickening toward motion, toward communion, toward sound. Dhikr reaches wide arms, holding not only to recall, recollect, but also to bear in mind. Dhikr tells us that all thought is an act of presence, of holding, harboring. To dhikr is to mention, too, the incitement of naming, flesh and voice as portal, conjuring, carrying. It is for this reason that dhikr is a pillar for the faithful, a practice in which a body remembers itself, spinning back into soul. Dhikr, in Sufi Islam, a ritualized recitation in a tempo of motion or breath. For others, prayer beads or counted fingers aid in the remembrance of Allah. Dhikr as a sacred puncture in routine. Words as reaching for, enacting the unseen. And so we see dhikr as a practice, worlds made by what we bear in mind or lips. To remember is to reify. To name a thing is to bond. Dhikr as a web of questions that might map a life. What are you willing to admit you have seen? Whose name is on your lips? And which do you answer to? Okay, so thank you. Thank you. So now I'm going to read a small excerpt from the narrative portion that falls under this chapter, Dhikr. My father learned his losses backwards, piecemeal. When Hurriya and her sons left Gaza in 1967, Ziad cried for weeks. The grief he felt was for the loss of his first place, its beloved beach, its world of familial arms. He missed the cousins, the schoolmates whose lives, in their symmetry to his, made reality feel whole. Of course, the word leja had hovered over everything in Gaza, where the majority of its residents were refugees. But this word, refugee, required memory, a knowledge of the world before. Young, Ziad had not yet experienced language as a form of traveling time. Palestine was the dust on his feet. It was Deir al-Balah, Khan Yunus, Rafah. These he tasted with his body. It was these that he would miss. 99% of Palestine lay beyond the boundary of the Gaza Strip, still unreal to him. The closest he came to Ibtis was in the bodies of elders, survivors, their village tucked in remembering skin. To them, Ibtis was the hope their eyes met when they faced toward the east. In Jeddah, the landscape shifted. On Gaza Street, Palestinians surrounded Ziad, but this word, Palestine, began to mean different things. Here, neighbors held keys to homes from Nablus to Quds to Khalil. On the street, accents and memories jostled among differently textured pains. A new breadth of loss grew into view. This, too, was Palestine. Blocks and bodies where violence shadowed joy, where every choice was a stone thrown against impossibility. Okay, I'm going to skip forward. It was with his mother that Ziad returned to Palestine. This is 10 years later. The Israelis, for reasons never given, had banned Musa for life. But by the time Ziad, my father, by the way, Ziad is my father, reached 16, Hurriya was determined to visit home. As mother and son approached the border, she instructed him as he would one day instruct me. to be placid in the presence of soldiers. But when the border guard told him, "You're not Palestinian, you're Gazan," Ziad snapped back without a pause. "No, I'm Palestinian." "No, you're Gazan." "No." Hurriya squeezed his shoulders. They crossed over with two bowed heads. Nearly 10 years had passed since Ziad and Hurriya left Dir al-Balah, and their return reached my father like a flood. Tight joints softened in the familiar air, salt breeze a caress. Walking, their bodies traversed years, wavering between a gone time and what remained. Ziad thrilled at every overheard voice, the shape of the Ghazawiya dialect filling the air. He felt an urge to follow every stranger, to press their arms and gush. "إحنا أهل, أنا واحد منكم, بالله تاخذ بإيدي." Their relatives greeted them with joyful shouts. Arms enwrapped their limbs and necks, kisses and dua like warm rain. Ants clasped Ziad's face, exclaiming at his growth, while children clucked and spun. The travelers dropped suitcases swollen with gifts, sank onto seat cushions, aching after 3 days journeying by land. Circled by her kin, Hurriya surged with life. She answered their clamor with laughter and reassurances that the two had arrived unharmed. Beside her, a dazed Ziad returned the chain of salams, overwhelmed by the sight of faces at once intimate and strange. Some were new to him, while others shimmered as half-memories. But even the strangers' faces held some contour he recognized. In the coming weeks, he would struggle to keep track of the dozens who now claimed him by kin. But for the rest of his life, Ziad would be in love with homecomings and live in terror of goodbyes. Night after night, over pots of endless sweetened chai, history swam into him. His mother and her relatives turned for hours to reminiscing, trading long and layered tales of ibdis, of a time before the wars. Word by word, they raised a world inside him. There, a new hunger grew. The occupation had changed Gaza. Everywhere, the work of theft was plain. Illegal Jewish settlements appeared in both Gaza and the West Bank, bringing thousands of Zionists into their midst. But one strange blessing arrived with the occupation. Because the Israelis declared all land for themselves, Gaza became, briefly, relatively, porous. For a time, it became possible to travel from the Strip to the West Bank and even the territories lost in the Nakba. The territory called Israel by many, but which Palestinians referred to as the Inside, or 1948. A refusal. The Zionist entity was an actor, an idea, but the land still knew its name. And so Ziad found himself swept by relatives beyond the borders of his memory. Through their day trips outside the Strip, Palestine began to sprawl. In mere hours, he might find himself playing soccer in Hebron or swimming in Tel Aviv. Another strange intimacy. Palestine was far vaster than he'd ever seen, and yet all of it was so close. The long occupation has succeeded in changing us from children of Palestine to children of the idea of Palestine, wrote Murid Barghouti. I have always believed that it is in the interest of an occupation, any occupation, that the homeland should be transformed in the memory of its people into a bouquet of symbols. That summer, Ziad's homeland gathered, widened. It built himself in the sand behind his ears, the fried fish in his throat. The child of Gaza was growing, a son of Palestine. May I have 2 more minutes? Okay. One day, in the weave of food, rest, and conversation, Hurriya's cousin made a suggestion. Why not drive the two visitors to Aibtis? Ziad was eager. His mother quietly agreed. The drive took less than 2 hours. On the way, their eyes scanned for signs of the Israeli army, their bodies tensing with each blind turn and cresting hill. Even when obeying the law, the occupied body is still trespasser, and at any moment might be prey. Even so, the mood was lively as memories unrolled with the road. Hurriya and her cousin conjured gone landmarks. Here was Beit Affa. That way was Julis. Then it was their own trees they saw. A crooked palm and broad sycamore watched, silent, as mother led son from the car. Where 91 houses once stood, they found crushed walls, dismembered rooms. The ground was studded with broken stone, each one a frozen gesture, its meaning expelled. Amid the wreckage, Hurriya called to memory. Down here was the Diwan. That way was our field. Her words stirred the hot, still air. A portal opened in her speech, past stepping through. Half homes rose from their knees, the street swept clean of debris. Hurriya rose too, her back straightening with something like joy, an offering of pride. Ziad watched her with new eyes. All his years he had grown in the penumbra of her grief. Its blue light washed his world, its rays cast obliquely from the rim of an eclipse. There were many sorrows he had names for, their departure from Gaza, his father's harshness, the cruel words thrown at Palestinians by sneering Saudi boys. But he had not understood that these were only shadows, the jagged, inverted silhouette of the life he might have lived. Dimness is only half as dark without knowledge of the sun. For a few hours, he walked in the light of what almost, but never was. They stood for a long time at the village cemetery. Before them, simple slabs of stone inscribed with Quranic ayat and family names. In their midst, a rough swath of destruction, crushed headstones left by the tread of bulldozer or tank. Grass crept around the rubble. There was no sign of construction or cultivation. This land had been razed to desecrate, to break the traces of Arab lineage and all suggestion of return. The drive home was silence. Years collapsed into minutes, retracing catastrophe. Thank you.
Terror counter. Everything is extricable. Nothing is extant. We are an eye. We are a door. We are locked. All our means of relation disappear into the grind. The grind is he who slicks my oil throat. I am hijacking everything. Watch. I, 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 The feeling of fear is a good one. Half-shaped, we tumble from the politic's mouth. The giant picks us up, peers at our oil skins, our yesterday muscles. The giant returns us to the grind. Dandruff speckles from my skull, and each fleck is a drone, warning the bathers of a shark which cannot end and does not stop. What it is to count the state of our forever, to receive a grant for the way my beard does or does not engender fear, my handful of dust, to regulate the fingers of each pore, the language of my wildness, the blood flowing like a trade caravan. I am invaded by blood, which wields a razor, which tames my wildness. I am hairless now, smooth as a baby's neck. A baby's neck. A baby. A baby. A baby's neck. A baby wailing forever, interred in rock, soot. A baby's fingernails, too small to offer protection to anybody. Inside the poem, trapped, frozen into submissions, transfers of meaning, terror and light, cemeteries of courts, bled for $1. My page count of sorrow, ironically poisoned, no honesty left. Songs inside letters, hands inside wells. The wail of it, a path I seek to follow. The wail of it singing, I, 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 I need. An American writes a poem, sells it to a university magazine run by exploited graduate students. A different American sees the poem online and buys the magazine for $22.95. Of this, a small percentage to the university, little to nothing to the graduate students, whose union is fomenting daily and with the certainty of mold. The university courts an endowment from a conservative billionaire. Certainly, says the billionaire, and drafts a quick proposal for an endowed chair of the study of international relations through the lens of finance. The chair will, in the next year, recommend a strong legal and policy response to the growing movement for a popular boycott of Israel, which an undergrad will be surveilled and suspended for supporting. The billionaire files his taxes, paying roughly 0.5% of his declared income. In the night, his teeth grind lightly as cruelty works through his system like moss. He will wake with no memory of his dreams, which were Artodian, prophetic. The billionaire's taxes go toward the production of this year's slate of U.S. weaponry and are pocketed by the financiers of major capital, their defense contracts quietly renewed. At a banquet, the financiers begin to vomit, the shellfish revolting. A percentage of this weaponry is bundled into an $800 million arms deal with the state of Israel. A new kind of infringement on life is dreamt up, written down, and revised to be voted on summarily. The arms deal pays for the restocking of an arsenal depleted during the last escalation of genocide. The arsenal receives a fresh supply, some 10,000 M16A1 rifles, 350 M203 grenade launchers, 200 M250 caliber machine guns, and an assortment of 30 caliber, 50 caliber, and 20 millimeter ammunition, among others whose names have been redacted by the linguists. These weapons are dispersed among the various branches of Israel's occupying forces, who are, as a matter of citizenship, required to take part in the military front of the genocide. A routine settler, once they have fulfilled this requirement, begins to serve on one of the other fronts: ideological, academic, cultural, culinary, linguistic, political, social, economic, and the front of the dreaming. One of the soldiers issued a rifle which fires black sponge rounds, introduced in 2015, heavier and thus more lethal than typical sponge-tipped rounds, which are classified by the occupation forces as non-lethal despite evidence to the contrary, clambers into his AIL Storm Border Police Jeep, produced by Automotive Industries Limited on a Chrysler license, and scrolls on his phone as the Jeep rumbles toward Al-Ram. He sees the poem. He reads its lines to himself silently. They enact something about grief in his first language. He thinks about Brooklyn. He screenshots the poem before clambering out of the Jeep to aim at the youths throwing stones, most of which are likely repurposed rubble from bombed buildings previously understood by some to be homes. Irritated, the soldier fires a black sponge round into a child's chest, which causes massive internal bleeding that will later cause the child, my cousin Muhi, to die. This is the place analysis ends. The soldier will go home and surrender to the dream of militant preservation. He will never think of this day again. I will think of this day constantly, imagining and reimagining the round hurtling through the wind, as again an American poem just breaks somebody's heart. Always interesting when we clap. Craft talk. The first image, a little girl's body pulled out of the rubble. I strike from the poem. Let her rest. Language is a failed state. The second image, my own body stripped and hung by my fingers, less their nails, piled neatly on a nearby table. I keep. The poem is a space to rehearse for the future. The third image, a dictum of power, something like the state is, or the Guggenheim-winning poet is. This I soften and blur. In my weakest moments, I still succumb to the desire for a book deal and avoid threatening its keepers. The fourth image, rubble alone, pulled from the mouth of my body, hanging from a hook in the black site. This image I widen so it envelops the entire page, yellow bile coating the margins. I am interested in frightening you. I do not want to be alone anymore. The fifth image, a drone giving birth to a child with gold leaf on its fingernails. I wipe the mucus off. I give it a name. At the edge of the poem, the baby slouches toward Jerusalem. When it crosses the border, the poem can no longer see it. The drone child becomes an imagined condition the poem has released into the world. I do not know what it intends. I do not know what it will eat. The sixth image, my father, dragged into the poem against his will once more. I suspend him here with me. I revel in our togetherness. His nails join mine. Our backs are cut, our eyes plucked out. The cruelty of jailers infected my language. Everything I love, I turn to cruelty. The poem now is just another cell. All I know is how to write us dead. Inside this image, I reach out my little toe and touch the image of my father's little toe. The state is crueler than your poem ever could be. I make the poem, make my father say. Terror counter. Hush, hush. Everybody loses me. I get lost. I am loss. A meal for a historical owl. My bones regurgitated, neatly piled in the black site of American literature. I was a we. We were a curse. Panic, debt, the United States District Court for the of, wood, stone, panic. Ours not to ever survive, ours to be done to and die. Charge of the grand jury. Everything is extant, nothing is extricable. Grief, codified like a promissory note, they have kept me in forms by myself, huddled against the sharp light of perpetuity, skin coated with a thinner film of terror, settling into relations. Half of what I say is meaningless, but I say it so the other half may reach you. Fingertips poking through breaks in the line, so lonely I miss being surveilled, so desperate I'd count every fear for you, sing you to sleep with my hands in plain sight, but I I, 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 I am a we. We are the dirt. We tasted the future. You weren't there. Jaws of the world breaking on our tomorrow muscles, kiss me in language of tunnels we need exorbitantly. We feel entirely alone. We condemn the recent. We are the recent, cannibalized for tax-exempt donations and sonnets. But tunnel takes me to future. Future pries my soul from my teeth and asks it what my name was and reminds me when I do not know. And when they come looking for us, God willing, we will be somewhere else. And at last, I will remember how to forget myself. And in that wail of forgetting, be found.
Thank you, guys. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. They told us we needed to project, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone can hear all right. Thank you to Sada and to Fargo for your incredible readings, and thank you to Kundiman for opening this space for us, and for all of our communities for nourishing us and giving us space to create so much work together. So yesterday we met up and we had a conversation where we agreed to enter this space and this conversation on the premise that we will assume in this moment that literature can be liberatory. And like Sada said, that we would engage with the absurdity of it, of being present in this kinds of space under empire and what it means for us. So one of the things that I was thinking about when you were both reading, I was thinking about Sada when you were reading the narrative from your father's perspective that you wrote about sort of the ghosts and know whose name is on your lips. And the idea or the action of a stone thrown against impossibility. And then for Fargo, one of the things that I was also thinking about when I was listening to you was the utilization of art as a tool, and how fascists have no qualm about utilizing every tool in their toolbox. And so it doesn't matter that the poem is sitting there performing liberation when they're able to make a material sum out of it that furthers their goals. And even if you, the poet, take the money that you get from the university magazine and you send it to mutual aid, there's still a percentage that is going into weapons. So one of the things that I was thinking about and that we touched on yesterday together was sort of thinking about how would you guys both begin to describe what can actually be liberatory in these contexts? Whoever wants to go first.
I mean, I think, I was part of a panel yesterday about resistance, and I've been thinking in the last 24 hours, like, finessing like the difference between resistance and liberatory writing. Obviously, I think they're so related. But I think that did you say liberatory or liberation? Which one?
Liberatory.
Complicated. Liberatory writing. I mean, I think it's a really long fight. And I think, I'm pulling out my book because I'm like, I did want to find that quote. The praxis of returning in moments, in imaginations, in the space between us when we gather. I think it's been a while since I've been writing for anyone but us. It's been a while since I've been writing to prove or to convince or to persuade. I write to survive, and that's where I enter the absurdity. As much as I do try to do other work towards liberation, I cannot seem to not be writing as well. So I enter writing as a place to wrestle and incite and invite my own imagination to probe and discover, if possible, reasons to stay and to keep fighting. And then I do think this is a slippery discourse because of how it's really close to the co-opted sort of idea of representation. Mm-hmm. But I do always remember that my family in Gaza, who've never touched this book, or, you know, who don't necessarily read everything I write, know that I'm writing and know that I'm speaking to them daily and trying to learn from them. Like, I consider them my teachers. And I know that they tell me frequently that not being forgotten and being in some way presence through words in another part of the world, especially this part of the world, means something to them too. So I don't want to discount that as much as I have a reflexive like revulsion to this idea of like voice to the voiceless, or just telling a story as if that alone simply is guaranteed to be worthwhile. So I write for us, and I write because writing keeps me here, and I'm in dialogue with that kind of writing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a big question, and I think that the way I'd like to answer it maybe is to borrow out of what we've already talked about together and heard embodied in Sada's reading in particular, is a few propositions and a few ways that those propositions might help us out of some of the discursive and rhetorical traps that we get into when considering the possibility of writing as being enmeshed inside of a liberation struggle, right? So if proposition one is, let's just assume that writing can be liberatory in some form. What that lets us do is not get stuck in the endless cycle of asking the question, right? Of like, what does it mean to be writing? We get in this space where there's no real answer to that question, because the possible answers to that question tend to require things of us that we might not be ready to do. So let's just assume writing can be liberatory so we can get rid of all the other stuff. Second, I think the idea of writing as a tool or one tool inside of a liberation struggle is also very useful, because it lets us also get out of the trap of believing that we are writers first and foremost, which may be true in various forms, but then believing that that is all we can do, that that is our only contribution to any sort of material struggle or ideological struggle. And if we believe that, we are going to feel very useless, because writing has certain limits, like it definitely does, right? There are things it can do and there are things it can't do. And if all we believe is that we can write, then yes, we will eventually feel despair and a lack of utility. But if writing is one tool out of a set of possible tools, then the third kind of question or area to arrive at a proposition is, well, what does writing actually do? Like, so that we can understand what and how to use it, and when we need to use other things. I think for me, in our conversation and in thinking about my own work and Sada's work and Lena's work, in some ways, one proposition might be that writing is a space for thinking and feeling differently, and for managing or addressing the affective components of participating in a liberation struggle in some form. These affective components are often not neatly fit into work like organizing, for example, right? In organizing, there is often not a lot of room for complex affective states like shame or despair or guilt or hopelessness. These are also things that we feel, and that as Palestinians, we have felt in various degrees for more than a century. So what do we do with those feelings, right? Because if we allow them to kind of dominate our everyday, then we won't do anything. So what writing might be is a space to give those feelings and those affective states their due consideration. I think about this a lot in particular, and Sada and I especially have talked about despair a lot, right? So despair as a condition which emerges from the circumstances that we move through the world in, that all of us to some degree or another are going to feel, because the world is massive and massively cruel. And it has resources that far exceed our resources. Despair is a natural and I think a communicative and teaching experience. But it also makes it very difficult to like go to a meeting, or go on the street if you are just constantly feeling despair. So what writing might offer is a space to consider that emotion, give it space, and wonder if it can be transformed into, I'm thinking about the word liberatory, even you making the distinction, Sada, between that and liberation, right? Liberatory feels to me like an opening or possibility. that we can move through into more material struggle, but we might not. So when I read or write something and I do feel a transformation in myself or a possible change, I can follow that and let it shift and dictate some of the ways that I live my life, or I could not, right? The literature itself is not going to push me into the street. I don't think that I believe that there's anything that really does that. But what it might do is create a possible opening in which I can analyze, think, or feel differently in a way that helps me continue to go to the street.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree that this affective dimension of the long struggle is one that we shouldn't discount again. And I think there's probably a part of our instinct to discount it that has to do with the dehumanization of living under fascism and occupation and genocide. The oppressor uses so many things, including literature, to bludgeon our imagination and our humanity out of us. So even the exercise of doing small, revivification, I can't believe I used that word, I haven't ever said it out loud, just reviving, I guess, are those inward states of the ability to feel our shame, to feel our sorrow, to wonder what it's telling us. Again, I do talk about despair a lot. I'm grateful for friends that join me in that, because despair does gesture towards an inwardness that knows that we deserve better for ourselves and our loved ones. And I would love to just read this other quote, that it's my other Haj Yahya quote, and I think it really speaks to what Fargo just mentioned. It is Haj Yahya adapting a quote from Fanon, who Fanon is another one who's often domesticated in ways that are not representative, but who also made space for the affective and the psychoanalytic. And so let me just, if you wouldn't mind hearing me. The dreams of the colonial subject are muscular dreams, dreams of action, dreams of aggressive vitality. I dream I am jumping above the wall, swimming near the shores of Akka, running in all the streets of Jaffa, and climbing the trees of Bir Zayt. I dream I burst out laughing. I am leaping across a river and chased by a pack of cars that never catches up with me. During colonization, the colonized subject frees himself, herself, themselves, night after night, between 9 in the evening and 6 in the morning. So that's Fanon and Haj Yahya. So the imagination is important too.
Yeah. I feel like the imagination is really important, especially when we're thinking about how we're utilizing fear and discomfort and despair and being able to propel us forward all the time. And I think you've talked about this a great deal, or we've at least talked about it personally, what it means to be situated in the long middle of revolution and what it means to be able to find portals and actions to continue furthering us. And I guess one of the things that I am also thinking a lot about from both of your books especially is I think one of the things that I really want to bring up is ghosts and unghosting. I don't think I have a specific question, but it's something that I'd like to make space for, if you guys would like to also bring that into the conversation.
Ghosts?
Ghosts or unghosting, because I think a lot of what is really present and important in Palestinian literature specifically is, I think this is a human trait in general, of this holding something up and saying, I loved you so much, like, do you see it? And a reader turning around and saying, we see it. And no, we understand, and we understand your remembrance. And so I feel like that is so present in your book with your grandmother, Allah yarhamha, but it's something that she's such a narrative in the book, and she really feels like the epicenter of it all. And I feel like it's not just about how is the book structured or the way that you were playing with time in the book, but really speaking towards the way that you use it to navigate your life. And so I feel like, I think it would be really interesting to bring that into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. No, I've been thinking a lot about ghosts for the last few years and taking them very seriously. This book exists because of ghosts, because of ancestors, because they're real. I almost, like everyone probably on this stage, in such a scattered state right now because I'm checking in on loved ones who are being bombed in multiple parts of the world. But I was going to say something when I walked up there saying, I am not whole, but I am very full. I am here with so many people that I am carrying. And I don't mean that as a burden. I mean that as like, this is my work. This is my like honor and privilege. I get to go into spaces where they would never have been invited, where their names would never have been uttered, where their bodies would have been discarded. And so I think a lot about that responsibility and also just what that means in narrative. And also this quirk of language that I discovered when I was writing, that the Arabic word khiyal means normally imagination, but it's also a word for phantom or ghost, a little bit obscurely, but yes. So there is this collaboration, this presencing. I think that writing this book specifically taught me that there are things that are more real than what I see. And yeah, just to create out of that place I just believe the ghosts, and I believe that I take my marching orders from them among few others. They're the people I answer to. And I think of the poet Danez Smith, who talked about asking themselves. They're a poet from Minneapolis, St. Paul, as probably everyone here knows. And they talked in an interview about they ask themselves as they're writing poetry of their people from Minnesota, or just more broadly, could I read this poem to the mother of Trayvon Martin? And I ask a similar question of myself as I'm writing, like, what if because sometimes my cousins do read what I write. Mm-hmm. My father read this book. What would my grandmother think? And this book is also, the last thing I'll say is, it is my project in the book, it is a exercise or like a manifestation of my own process of learning how to live with my grandmother presenced, and an imagination of what the world would look like, how it would have to change if women like my grandmother were at the epicenter of it. What a world we would live in if an illiterate, disabled, brown refugee was the one who we centered. Everyone would be okay, So those are some of my thoughts about ghosts.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think a ghost is an obligation. A ghost is a kind of debt. Just in structural terms within literature, and then also in our own lives, right? As you're expressing, Sara, that a ghost reminds us that we owe things to the dead, we owe things to the living, and to each other. And so, in some of the framing of your question, Lena, right, around the idea of thinking about this moment or our lives existing in the long middle of revolution, a revolution that has begun and has not finished, maybe cannot ever finish, but is kind of a horizon that we're always orienting our movement towards. I think thinking about that obligation to the dead, alongside the fact that thinking about that obligation to the dead in particular for me means that this work, or whatever that work entails, whatever that obligation entails, is the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And that is a very specific realization that I think a lot of people have not really had. And I think I'm talking specifically about understanding or trying to grapple or reckon with the last 3 years of genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. That work of trying to reshape and destroy the world in a way that honors their lives and deaths is the rest of every single person in this room's life. And it will be more than that. And I think then to turn back towards writing and what it might offer us in terms of addressing that obligation, one thing that it might do is help clarify and elaborate what that work needs to look like. Let me say like a specific example, perhaps, which is the statement that Gina read for us at the beginning of this event noted, for example, the genocides in Palestine and Sudan, noted bombardment of various Swana communities. And one aspect of writing that can perhaps help us, again, clarify what we owe the dead is to revise and specify that the writing of that statement to name who is dropping bombs, who is committing genocides, because it reminds us that these are institutions that are then made up of people, and we know their names. and we are in relationship to them. We are in the same cities as them. I live in Washington, D.C. I'm in the spaces that these people are writing, again, like they are writing and using the tools that we use as writers in order to kill our families. And so again, right, like avoiding in our own writing the temptation to, for whatever reason, elide the specificities of what is the network of relationship that creates a genocide and sustains a genocide is a writing exercise, right? It's a language exercise for us of insisting that we continue to add detail and specificity, because that tells us that if I'm thinking about my obligation to the dead being to stop these processes and disrupt these processes, I have targets. And my writing can tell me who those targets are, and what those structures are that I would like to intervene in. So I think, like, again, you know, it's ways of trying to think about what tools we already know how to do as writers or have been given as writers through whatever training or learning or gatherings that we've had together, and trying to then see, like, how do those tell me what my obligations might be to my ghosts, and how do they allow me to better meet those obligations?
Thank you, Fargo. Yeah, I kind of want to sit with that for a second. I feel like that was a great answer, honestly. Yeah, yeah. I guess what I'm really thinking about is the affective of it all, of what it actually means. Because we've talked about this, we mentioned this earlier, that fascists don't mind utilizing any tool. They have no ethical discourse within themselves. And I guess I'm just kind of thinking back also on when you were doing your reading earlier of language as a failed state, and like specifically your craft talk. And one of the lines that has really been sticking with me is, and I'm going to paraphrase it, is when you lay the girl to rest in the poem instead of having her be the opening line. That's something that I think is, that I'm also thinking about while we're talking about the affective measure that we can use in our writing, and know at what point is there a limit? At what point do we feel that, like you were mentioning earlier when you were talking about your family as your guide, instead of entering the territory of I'm giving voice to the voiceless, it becomes more of a protection, I guess, like a protective huddle within your community of how you write, knowing that you're writing to them, and you're writing for them, and that this is an obligation and this is a debt that is being repaid, as you mentioned, Fargo, for our debt as well, but also for our living. I think a lot about what it means to not just want to die for your country or for your cause, but what it means to live for it as well. So yeah, thank you guys. Yeah. Are we good on time?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Okay.
What is time?
But yeah, I guess one of the things that I'm also thinking about that I would wonder if you guys would like to expand on would be what it looks like to be affective in our literature, and like different ways that we could utilize that in moving forward, or different streams of thought that that takes you in, and know how to stay present in the street, how to stay present in the revolution. What are different ways that you guys work together within community, within your work? What does it mean to submit to a publisher? What does it mean to understand that at this point, when we're agreeing to put our work out, especially, we were talking about this yesterday, that there's only so much you can actually say under empire, and there's only so much that will be publishable, and there's also only so much you can actually say. And Sara, we mentioned this, that back home, when you order a book to come in, it has to go through a customs officer who has to decide if it will take, if it poses a threat of like breaking the moral society, or it's against the government. And so it was very interesting for me when I came to the US to have the idea of like, oh, there's so much revolutionary literature around, when I was so used to always thinking that, right, but is it actually, or is it a psych op? Being able to have access to this, what does it actually mean? And then you become a writer, you engage in the industry yourself, and you realize, oh yeah, there is actually a line, and there are institutional things that are holding you back, or places that don't want to publish you, places that are uncomfortable by, like, for instance, aligning with PACB, and places that you can only feel so ethical submitting to and working with. So I guess that's something that I'd also like to open the conversation up towards, if you guys would be down for that.
Yeah. Maybe another proposition that is part of this conversation is that the act of writing, the practice of writing, is value neutral. It is not inherently revolutionary. It's not inherently oppressive. It just is a practice. It's a set of tools. So then I think one thing we can think about is all of the contexts and environments and decisions that start to shape the practice in one way or the other, right? So for example, writing a set of poems that then like start even the idea in one's brain that like this is going to be a book which is going to be published by a press in the United States and enter this kind of marketplace economy and exist as a commodified object, starts to shape what that book can do and how it will accomplish it. And in my opinion, it starts to get less in our control because I have less control over the method of dispersal and circulation that object is going to live inside of. I can't control how people read it, what they bring with it when they read that work. I can't control the price. All of these things, right? I can't control where it's sold, these kinds of considerations. Versus if I am writing and I decide that these poems feel useful to me, and I wonder if they would feel useful to other people directly involved in a struggle that I would like to be involved in or am involved in, the range of ways that I can get those poems to those people and share space with them is very open. And it doesn't need to be a book that is published by a press, right? And so what I'm curious about maybe is just like all of the many ways that we are perhaps told we don't have agency over certain decisions or persuaded that we don't by virtue of the professionalization of writing and our identity as a writer, right? That is my foremost identity. There are certain considerations that make that more materially real than others, like I make most of my money through writing or through doing events. And that is just a fact, right? That's a choice I've made. And it does mean that there are ways that I don't have as much access to the kinds of decisions that I'm describing right now. And as long as we know that and are just very clear, I think, about the set of decisions we're making, it also means that we can't like claim to do things or be doing things that we're not actually doing. Which I think is a very dangerous place. If you start to believe what you put on grant applications, that's not good. So thinking then, right, about writing as a tool and a practice, I think, lets us also start to understand that we have the capacity to shape its relationship to the struggles that we're involved in. And that the things that we might assume about what a piece of writing is, what it sounds like, who it is read by, who it is written by, who it is written in community with, the ways that it is circulated, places that it exists online, in text, in a book object form. All of these, we have assumptions about what they are because AWP and the spaces of other writers and institutions and publishers have told us this is what happens. You write a book and you give it to us and we give it to people, right? Those are assumptions. And those are things that we have the capacity to constantly be shifting, right? In a way that is more directly responsive to your earlier question, Lena, about like what affective space does a particular piece of writing need to be in relationship with or to intervene in? And if that is like a more urgent space,
then it doesn't make sense to wait 2 to 3 years for someone to maybe publish your book. Like, it might be that our forms of using writing as a relational object, a way that we are together with other people, have to also shift in order to meet the constant and escalating urgency of like the moment that we are in, right? That like there's never going to be enough time to slow down and write about something in a way that is as nuanced and beautiful as we might want to, right? That like actually what might be required by certain circumstances is a sloppiness or a sacrifice of certain ideas we have about what it means to write and be a writer in order to meet an urgent need, right? And that also means that the form we write in might need to be radically different. So all of this is to say, I think that like going back to whether or how writing as a practice can be liberatory, can gesture us towards engaging in things that make us freer. One thing that can help with that is to think of ourselves not as writers, not as first and foremost and primarily writers, but as people who would like to use writing in order to meet a certain problem or address a certain need. And if we then allow ourselves to like tailor the way that we write to meet that need, it's going to look very different than like even you and I here on stage reading from our published books. So I think that's maybe just like a proposition or provocation or reminder for all of us that writing can be, if we allow it to be, more capacious than we've been taught it might be.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Do you want me to talk? Do you talk?
I mean, I wouldn't mind adding a little to that. Possible? May I?
Yeah.
Okay. Provocation indeed, Fargo. I agree that the exigency should, we should always be questioning the publishing industry and all those assumptions, and now more than ever, to quote someone I know. So I really appreciate the invitation to, whether it's zines, whether it's publishing online, whether it's like having a sort of different relationship to the editorial process. I do think that there's a lot of preciousness. There's a lot of mannerisms and postures that we assume are gospel because of the MFA occasion of writing, because of English, because of the US, because of capitalism. So I think it's profoundly important to always hold those things in tension. And I'm like taken to naming this a lot now. I almost didn't sell my book. And I had so many rejections that were, my agent was like really disheartened and surprised. And I was also their first like Palestinian, I think. So I think it was a learning experience for them. But he did remark that these were like some of the most glowing rejections he had in years. But the argument was always like, we don't know what to do with this. We don't know how to sell it. So I almost did have to make some other choice. And I'm grateful I found the one editor that really believed in the book and empowered me to make the book and to rewrite some of it and revise it to be more militant as events unfolded. I wrote it half before and half after October 7th. But the thing I was going to intervene on or add before your comments, Fargo, was the reminder of the reader in this whole process. And I think that one thing I've been thinking about a lot is, well, to go back to the censorship back home, I think that a lot of it has to do with the like psyops of we live in a free society here. I think that's very real. I also think that fascists are illiterate in many ways, and there's like a lot of ways to smuggle powerful and like inciting sorts of sentiments and affects. I think of Fargo's line, like, we feel completely alone. There's a lot of ways to read that. We have our own codes, right? And I think that we can also, like, I tried in this book to create moments where different readers would experience obstacles or blocks or provocations in a way that I wanted them to be, affected in a specific way if they were Palestinian, but also if they weren't. Mm-hmm. And writing this book was also a process of me like questioning what it means to be a reader and what a reading practice can be and how collaborative it can be, and how making a reading process difficult and not smooth I think is another way that writing can be liberatory, because it's jarring. And I wanted certain readers to be jarred in certain moments. I wanted this book to feel like a little bit different than like maybe a simple like pro forma like ethnic memoir might. Because I also, I think that the invitation to believe one's life as a simple chronological and smooth narrative is actually something that I fell for as a person, as a daughter of an immigrant in this land of promise, and I wanted to break that up. So, I think just thinking about how our writing can teach readers to read differently is something that we can also do that can really be smuggled in or like structured into books that might get published. I mean, like I said, I almost didn't, but I did, and I was only taking cues from many other writers who have managed to slide things into this ecosystem that I think I learned from them, and there are codes that we can learn and teach and pass and carry that can fly under the radar in a lot of ways. So I think of being insurgent, and I do think that there is a space still I will defend for writing slow and for consecrating and for sitting with sentences, not because I'm in an MFA program, no offense to MFAs, but not to be precious, but because some of our ghosts have not been mourned. And I want to consecrate, and I want to, again, like, I want to open up space where I want the reader to feel a silence, to feel an awe or tragedy in a sense that this society and our modes of storytelling and our languages do not often make space for. There is a space for taking a week to write a sentence about my father's face. That also matters. Like, I think that the invitation is to always ask for more, whether it's more ways to smuggle weapons and to F shit up, or more space and time to sit with a name in vigil in a text too. So just more. We can always ask for more.
Thank you, guys. I think it's time that we can open up for questions. I don't know how. We're out of time. Psych, no one can ask a question. I'm sorry. Please ask them at the end once we finish.
Thank you all so much for those incredible readings and this conversation. Please join me in a round of applause and appreciation. Panelists, we're going to get a quick group photo if you're open to it. So if you could stay on this stage while folks proceed out for book signings, that would be great. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Please meet us out in the lobby just outside the ballroom, where we'll have books for sale and where our speakers will be signing books shortly. Thank you.